How's it going, everyone, and welcome in for another episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Pretty light week this week, but there is definitely some big news that came out at the end of last week with the Pac-12 announcing the additions of San Diego State, Boise State, Fresno State, and Colorado State, which is just the newest news on the realignment front, which is going to have impacts across really all of college sports. And so I'll start to kind of piece that together. We'll get also into a little bit of the news later on of San Diego adding another piece to their coaching staff. So of NBA ties and also ties to head coach Steve Lavin. So it'll be great to kind of talk a little bit about that. But really, we are here to talk about the impact of what the Pac-12 has now done, adding 4 Mountain West schools to its collection of 2. So Washington State and Oregon State have invited San Diego State, Colorado State, they have not invited, they have added, the Pac-12 has added San Diego State, Colorado State, Boise State, and Fresno State to the existing 2 members, Washington State and Oregon State. This will be effective the beginning of the 26-27 season, which means that the Pac-12 is now at 6 schools, and as part of the agreement, that they will need to add 2 more to be able to compete as a conference for the college football playoff. So there's still more work to be done for this conference, but this group of 6 is going to be the group that makes the collective decisions moving forward on who else will be joining the Pac-12. And yes, they will be staying as the Pac-12 regardless of how many teams they end up with. So, the obvious question is who's next? And yes, this is a WCC podcast, but I'll get there, how this trickle down starts to happen. Well, the first off is that does mean that Washington State and Oregon State, assuming that they can add in the last couple of teams, they will be done with the WCC after the 25-26 season. So the 2 full seasons that we were anticipating having these 2 schools in the conference does appear to be the way it's going to be. And it will be 2 seasons of the Cougars and the Beavers in the WCC before they go back to the Pac-12 as it's going to be reconstructed. So who is next on that list? Who could the new Pac-12, the Pac-6, add to this group that is going to make some level of sense? There's obviously, you can take a look at the rest of the Mountain West teams that are left. New Mexico, Nevada, UNLV, San Jose State, Wyoming, Air Force, Utah State, and Hawaii on the football front. There's also been talk about Memphis and Tulane. They're going to have to add some level of notoriety with these remaining 2 or how many ever more that they add. Especially when you look at who is left on the West Coast. It's not like that there's that many schools remaining who play football out west. And it does seem like that there's been more emphasis, been more attention to be paid about the locality of these schools. And obviously we know the 10 schools that ditched the Pac-12 did not care about that. UCLA and USC jumping to the Big Ten, along with Oregon and Washington. Cal and Stanford jumping to the ACC. Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah jumping to the Big 12, which maybe made a little bit more sense than the others. But you kind of see what those teams did, but also what Oregon State and Washington State have done with their additions. There's some locality to it. There's a geography to it that makes sense with the 4 schools they've brought in. Also, the fact that you think about those 4, you add the Southern California market, you add the Colorado market, you bring in also Central California, and then additionally, you also bring in Boise, which we know is has been one of the better non-power conference football programs over the last 25 years. So if it's one of those schools, let's say it's the Memphis, let's say it's Tulane, that gets them to 8. That hits the minimum number, but could it just be that? Could they add someone else? The Mountain West schools are kind of interesting cases. If you add Nevada, if they add New Mexico, those seem like two that make a lot of sense. UNLV also makes a lot of sense. Just because you think about then the markets that they'd be adding. So there's definitely some pieces here that make sense for the Pac-12. And on a football front, and of course that's what this is all being driven by. These are some of the better football programs with also just longer histories of success. Because then even thinking about Memphis, thinking about Tulane, just the distance of those schools to me still plays a big factor in what the rest of them are going to want to do. And then again, you look at the rest of everybody else in the West, then it's like, what? You're going to go after the likes of Idaho. You're going to go after the likes of Sac State. You're not really going to go down the FCS route. Like, not the Pac-12 will not go down that route to try to recruit somebody else in. They're going to have to go with someone who has an established fan base, has an established presence in FBS, and at the very least has been consistent, not just over the last couple of years, but over probably the last 10, 20 years, to show that there's some level of validity to that football program and what they're going to be fan base wise, facilities wise, and everything else. And of course, the added note on the football front that Oregon State AD Scott Barnes did say that having football will be a requirement for a school that's going to join the Pac-12 moving forward. Which, of course, does mean that any idea that once they hit their 8 number, they're going to look into the idea of some of the non-football schools, Gonzaga, St. Mary's, whomever, is out of the question. They will not be joining the Pac-12, even if there was interest, which honestly I don't think there was a ton of interest on the other side anyway. But if with the Pac-12 potentially taking more of the Mountain West, taking some of the American, out West, what does that do for the Mountain West? The remainder of the Mountain West Conference. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that nothing changes, and that's the 7 that they have right now. New Mexico, Nevada, UNLV, San Jose State, Wyoming, Air Force, Utah State are those who play basketball in the Mountain West. No Hawaii for this. This is now nowhere near the juggernaut that the previous Mountain West was, with the losses of San Diego State, Colorado State, and really Boise. Fresno State really is not counted in that basketball component. Because they go from 6 bids where they had a year ago to a conference with 7 teams that has 2 of those teams left. 3 of those teams left. And this, without that top level, because again, San Diego State has been standard bearer of that conference for a long time now. Boise has also started to really solidify itself as being an every year in, year out contender in that conference. And Colorado State has also done the same. So long as they are healthy, we've seen what Coach Medved has been able to do with that program in that environment. They've been one of the best programs out West for the last 5 years. There's growth there with all those squads. And removing those from the existing Mountain West does hurt. Especially, again, if we're to assume that all these moves are being done for football reasons, and the Pac-12 goes and takes what is probably the remainder of the top tier of the non-power conference schools, what is left for the Mountain West to go after? I don't think they're going to be able to go after that next tier of the American Athletic Conference. Are they going to be the ones stuck with Idaho? Are they going to be the ones stuck with Sac State? Or are they going to have to go out and find another? Are they going to be the ones who have to search out an FCS school who could potentially make that leap to join the Mountain West at an FBS level. And then at that point, this is all about the TV money. Who's going to give that conference a football TV contract that is going to be lucrative enough with that existing group of schools, plus lower tier other programs, that actually makes that the viable option? Because I could see this also breaking up in two ways, because really it's like, if they go down that route, which is probably what they're going to do, the TV contract doesn't seem like it's going to be all that lucrative. And that's going to trickle down to basketball and to the other programs. And a basketball conference who right now, you have 3 of the remaining schools, tournament schools from a year ago in there, this probably slides down to a 1 or 2 bid conference with no one really solidified at the top. Yes, maybe New Mexico is there, maybe it's Utah State. But the depth of this conference has been depleted. The validity of them as a multi-bid conference year in, year out for the NCAA tournament becomes in question. Even more so than even the WCC. Because obviously when you look at the top of the WCC, it's very clear you have the 1-2. And then, yes, it has gotten questionable after that when it comes to tournament bids. But the Mountain West isn't going to look much better than that. If, in fact, they're going to look worse than what the WCC looks like the rest of the way down the list. And that's all. And that's also, again, us with the assumption that Oregon State, Washington State are gone by the time this all starts to come to fruition for the Mountain West. So could some of those schools maybe start to rethink what they're going to do, and maybe the concentration becomes less on football and more on basketball? Or at the very least, figuring out that they need to find a conference that they can find a more lucrative deal on the basketball front, while maybe they do something completely different on the football end. Because I think these schools are going to have to be more creative with how they're going to rethink their status as football programs, because of all the other things that are happening around that are completely independent of what they can control. What they could control is what status they have for basketball and their other sports. If the Mountain West is going to start to look like a shade of their former selves, and maybe almost look like what the WAC had been the last 10 years or so, last 10, 15 years, then maybe it is worth it for them to look elsewhere. And yes, this is me starting with my WCC hat on, thinking about who would be attractive for the WCC to go ahead and take out of that that remaining Mountain West group. And there's 4 of the schools that to me make a lot of sense. And if some of them do get poached by the Pac-12, maybe whoever is left is going to be interested, and they would find a good home in the WCC, as BYU has done in the past, as Washington State and Oregon State are going to find out, as Grand Canyon and Seattle are also going to be moving into the WCC. New Mexico is the obvious one. New Mexico is a program that just has made really has that strong basketball presence. They have the fan base. They have the facility. That is a program that makes a whole lot of sense to me for the WCC. That would be someone who would jump right in and be right into the mix at that top tier of the league. Maybe like that, not with the Gonzaga St. Mary's, but right below them, they would immediately jump into that group. Nevada is also another one that really jumps out to me. They are a former WCC member way back in the day. It's another one that is just up the road. You add that Nevada component to the WCC as well. So again, keeping with the geographic sense making here, Nevada, adding them because of the success they've had over the X number of years, fan base, the facilities, again, they make a whole lot of sense for what the WCC, I think, could do moving forward. UNLV is another obvious one. Again, they play the WCC tournament already in Las Vegas. It's a market that every WCC team is familiar with. They go there. It might get the WCC out of the Orleans if they were to add that team, because then they could move over the Thomas and Mack. It would actually check off so many boxes for what the WCC would be looking for. But it's also why I do think that they're going to be one of the teams that probably ends up in the Pac-12 eventually, because of the market, because of the facilities, because of the notoriety of that name, UNLV. They probably end up joining the Pac-12, but if they don't, and the Mountain West starts to kind of fall apart or crumble, or they need to reformat, it might be in their benefit to take a look at the WCC and really kind of like look at that opportunity, because I do think that would add a ton of notoriety and, again, add some depth to the WCC roster. And then the last one is Utah State. Utah State is another one where we've seen the success of that program, regardless of the coach, over the last 20 plus years. Utah State is always in the mix. They're always right there. They're always a strong opponent whenever WCC teams have to play them in the non-conference. It also adds that Utah market again. The WCC obviously had a lot of success having BYU in the conference for the decade plus that they were here. Adding Utah State, adding another spot that's going to be in that general Salt Lake City region I think would be a huge add for the WCC. So, again, like, I don't think that you're getting all four of them. I don't think that's even a possibility. But if you got one of them, I think that would be a huge get. And depending on how this all works out, I think there's going to be an opportunity to grab even two of these four, because just by the way that this is all going to break down and fall. Honestly, like, this is what the Pac-12 is doing with the schools that they have grabbed. I think there is a significant possibility that the Mountain West ends up getting so decimated that maybe there is a possibility that there is no Mountain West Conference within a few years, just because of who is left and what they're going to have to do to reformat what that league looks like in just a few years. And all of this to be said of, like, everything that we've seen move toward what the Pac-12 is going to be, what some of the other West Coast schools have done, what the Big 12 has done, what the ACC has done, what the Big East has done. You know what almost every little bit of piece tells me? Gonzaga is going absolutely nowhere. And the Pac-12 has already said they're not interested because it has to be a football school. And now, I don't think that it would have made sense for Gonzaga to go there anyway, but it seems that the feeling is mutual, so that is already out. The new Mountain West does not look like it's going to carry the weight that I think Gonzaga would want it to, especially now, without the top tier schools that are walking out the door and heading to the Pac-12. Unless something drastically changed when it comes to the shares that Gonzaga would receive from a new Mountain West conference, a reformatted Mountain West, I just don't see them looking at Gonzaga looking at the Mountain West as a legitimate option. Also, considering if the Mountain West really wants this to salvage the football component, they're not going to look at a non-football school. They're going to look at someone who can help them on the football front, and Gonzaga obviously doesn't do that. And yes, there's been all the talk about the Big 12. Gonzaga was in a lot of conversations with them a year ago, this time a year ago. We know UConn has also been part of those conversations. And I think the UConn conversation is the telling sign that Gonzaga will not be going to the Big 12, because UConn is coming off back-to-back national championships. is maybe the most successful college basketball program of the last 20 years, 25 years. They have a football program, albeit it's a bad football program, but they have an FBS football program. The Big 12 said, you know what? We're going to pause in this conversation. We'll get back to you later. If they said that to UConn, who checks off every basketball box imaginable, with a football program, and they said no, Gonzaga is not even in the conversation anymore. If the UConn standard was not good enough for the Big 12 schools, Gonzaga, without a football program, is just not going to be in that conversation anymore. And then, of course, that goes back to the Big East. Let's say UConn was accepted to the Big 12 and they decided to go that route. Yes, the Big East is left without another big school. Would they look to add? Possibly, probably. But who would it be? And the last round of changes, last round of that conversation with Gonzaga, it seemed like that was squashed because of a very basic thing that many Gonzaga fans don't have a problem with. But it sounded like almost every Big East coach and administration had a problem with, and that was travel. Traveling all the way to the West Coast to go play in Spokane for not only basketball, but for volleyball, for track, for soccer, for baseball, for softball, for all these other sports becomes not a manageable solution. Especially when, again, you consider that the furthest west school that anyone in the Big East has is Creighton. And even Creighton is another 1,800 miles away from Spokane. Sorry, I think that number's quite wrong, but it's not that short of a distance between Omaha, Nebraska, and Spokane, Washington. Again, as for reference, just on the mileage front, San Diego is closer to Spokane than Spokane is to Omaha. So every WCC school is within that distance of Spokane, where the closest Big East school will be even further away. And the number of things, I've always thought that the travel thing is going to end up being ridiculous in the long run. And I know, no, if you did basketball only, maybe you have an argument there. But that's not what the Big East is going to do. They don't want a basketball only school joining them. They want a program that's going to be able to help them across the board, a full member. That's what they want. And Gonzaga, they're going to continue to face the problem that they are just so remote to the Big East that it's not going to work. Now, if Gonzaga could literally pick up the entire school, move it 1,000 miles east, and then drop it down wherever, they'd be in the Big East already. There wouldn't even be a question about this. But the reality is that their distance causes a problem for the Big East. No football causes a problem for the Big 12. The crumbling Mountain West is just a problem for Gonzaga. And the Pac-12, it's a football problem and also just a non-interest on both ends front. So, again, checking off these boxes, just looking at what is left for Gonzaga, guess what? You're stuck. You're going to be right here in the WCC for at least the foreseeable future. I do not see the logical jump. Even, again, competitively, Gonzaga can play with anybody. That has not been part of this conversation at all. It has been football and distance. Those have been the biggest hurdles that Gonzaga has had to deal with, and they are not going away. Honestly, they cannot be fixed. because Gonzaga's not getting a football program that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to do. They're going to be in the WCC. They're going to be stuck with St. Mary's, stuck with USF, Santa Clara. Grand Canyon's coming in. Seattle's coming in. This is the group you're with. And let's be honest, it has not been a detriment to their competitiveness to be in the WCC. We've seen them in 9 straight Sweet 16s. They've been to the title game in 2 of those years in the last 9. They're getting there. They have the talent. Them playing a quote softer schedule in January and February has not hurt them in the long run. They're fine right where they are. If they do end up actually winning it all at some point, it will just make the story that much more impressive that they were able to do it from the WCC, from a conference that has not had a national champion since the Bill Russell days of USF. All right, one more note before we're going to wrap this one up. So, yes, San Diego did add a new assistant coach. Many are going to be familiar with the name. Former NBA player Earl Watson will be joining the coaching staff for the Toreros, rejoining his old college coach, Steve Lavin. Remember, Watson played at UCLA. He's been an assistant coach. Well, he's been a coach off and on for the last decade. He spent the last few seasons with the Toronto Raptors as an assistant with them. So this is someone who, again, has coached at the professional level, knows what he's doing. He was the head coach very briefly for the Phoenix Suns that one season. So this is someone who knows how to run a program, is going to be a very capable recruiter if he needs to be. We'll see what his role is going to be with this program, but this is, again, like, you look at the WCC and just the legitimacy of the coaches that are in the league. And I think that's something that many times goes overlooked by many. When you look at just like up and down the coaching tree, the coaching window of the WCC. Mark Few, obviously on Team USA. Randy Bennett's 500 plus wins. Herb Sendek, 500 plus wins. You look at Steve Lavin, who has had success at multiple locations and been to a Sweet 16 himself. You look at someone like a Chris Gerlifson, who is building at USF. Coach Dave Smart at Pacific, who has a ton of success at the Canadian basketball and what he's been able to do. Like, you have a lot of successful coaches in this league, and adding Earl Watson to Steve Lavin's coaching staff is going to be, I think, a huge lift for them. They're almost a full reset on their roster, much like a year ago. So we'll see how San Diego is able to kind of build very quickly early this season. So again, I think it's going to look very much like a year ago in their early going. So that San Diego squad will be definitely one to watch in the first month and a half of the season. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Be sure to subscribe on the YouTube channel, and then also follow on social media at Post by Zach, and then also at unofficial WCC pod. Well, that'll do it. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I will catch you later.